The title of this lesson is The French Revolution and Napoleon Bonaparte. However, in reality, the title should be The Results of the Enlightenment, because we are only going to mention the American Revolution and the creation of the new country in relation to the Enlightenment, because the Enlightenment principles were used by the Founding Fathers both in the Declaration of Independence and in the American Constitution. The arguments that John Locke presents in his second treatise of government are exactly the arguments used by Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin when they wrote the Declaration of Independence. Remember that at that time there was a very strong communication between France and the American colonies. And also remember that France and England had been enemies. In fact, France had just lost a war against England, and that's one of the reasons why the King of France was very eager to help the American colonies in their War of Independence. But if you look also at the United States Constitution, you'll see clearly that the organization of the new government follows the ideas of the Enlightenment. The organization of the government, the division of powers, comes directly from Montesquieu's in his The Spirit of the Laws. The entire democratic, well, partially democratic organization at the time comes from the idea of the Enlightenment of a representative government against the monarchy, and from the ideas of Rousseau of the general will. If you look at the Bill of Rights, the amendments to the Constitution, you'll see that it is exactly like the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen that was published at the same time as the amendments to the American Constitution. The United States then is very important for Europe, not so much because it affected directly what happened in Europe, but because it was the perfect example that the ideas of the Enlightenment were ideas that could be implemented. They were not just utopian dreams. In this lesson we have then three topics to discuss. The first one we have already discussed, and that's the influence of the Enlightenment on the newly created United States. The second one is the French Revolution, which happened just a few years after the American Revolution. And this one had a much stronger impact on Europe because the United States was a new country. They did not have to uproot strong traditions. They of course changed from being a colony of the British Empire to an independent country, but socially, the social establishment did not change. The same people who had been the political and social leaders of the colonies continue to be the political and social leaders of the United States. And the majority of the people, including those who did not have property and those women or slaves, did not have any say in the government. The French Revolution, though, had centuries and centuries of monarchy, of very established, very rigidly established division of social classes, economic classes. The power was not only the monarchy, which at the time was Louis XVI, but most of the control of society was in the hands of the nobility. The group that had very strong power in society was the first estate, and the first estate was the clergy. The other estate, the second estate, was the nobility, and they also had a great deal of land and a great deal of power. And the third estate was everybody else. One of the problems, and as you see when you read the situation, the general situation of what is called the old regime, or in France it was called the ancien regime, you will see all the privileges that the first and second estates had, and all the lack of privileges that the third estate had. Also, economically, between the first and second estate, which they were maybe 10%. Between the two of the groups, about 10%, and they owned about 40% of the land. So what that means is that 90% of the population owned about 60% of the land. At that time, land equaled wealth. Now, it may sound like something really bad. Now, it's nothing compared to what we have today in the United States. In the United States, 1% of the population owns approximately 35% of the wealth. 1% of the population. 10% of the population owns 75% of the wealth of the United States. And if we're going to compare with France, remember, in France, 90% of the population, that included the third estate, owned about 60% of the land. Here in the United States, 90% of the population owns about 25% of the wealth. The disparity financially was bad, and the members of the third estate, especially the bourgeoisie, were very unhappy because they owned industries. They were the professionals, but they didn't have any privileges. If you look at this cartoon, I hope you can see what it is, because this is a poor person. If you can see, he's so thin that you can see his bones, he's in chains, and this is the third estate. And the third state is being used as a horse by, and here is Louis the 16th, and here is the clergy, and here is the nobility. And this is the feeling that all the people of the third estate had at the time. There were many other causes of the revolution. One of them is the ideas of the Enlightenment, together with the fact that Louis was not the best person to rule a country. But in general, the situation, the laws that existed in France at the time did not match the realities of the country, and that's why people were so angry about it. And the rest of the lesson is how the revolution happened, how the revolutionaries managed to uproot traditions that had existed for so long, and they made a radical change in all the basic features of society. And the first action that became the symbol was the taking of the Bastille. The Bastille was not even an important place. It was a prison, yes. And it was a prison that didn't even have many prisoners. But it's the symbol of the despotism, because prisoners that were sent to the Bastille were sent without a trial. It was enough for the king to sign and say, I want this person to be sent to the Bastille. And very famous politicians or writers spent time at the Bastille. A good example is Voltaire. Voltaire went in and out, went to the Bastille, spent a few weeks, got out, was exiled, came back, wrote more, was sent to the Bastille again. Another that some of you may have heard about is the man in the Iron Mask, a very famous character that, if you haven't seen the movie, it's an old movie, but if you haven't seen it, I would really recommend it. And there is a book, a very famous novel also about the man in the Iron Mask. But the Bastille then is the symbol, and the taking of the Bastille happened on July 14th, 1789, and that is the celebration of independence. What July 4th is for the United States, July 14th is for the French. And once you analyze the taking of the Bastille and its significance, then the rest of the revolution, I would like for you to focus on a few specific things. Some events that were very positive, like the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, which is very similar to all the amendments of the Constitution of the United States, and that is the implementation of the ideas of the Enlightenment. All the freedoms that we are familiar with are also in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And this is something very positive, and people liked it. And when the new constitution was established, many people, many French citizens were excited about it. The monarchy was abolished, and in the constitution, not in the first one, in the second one, and many people, even though they maybe felt nostalgic, many people liked that also, because it was about time. It was about time to change routes. There were, however, a few things that I guess most historians when looking at the entire situation, realized that that was a mistake. And it was because the French people were religious. They were all Catholic. And when the Reformation happened in the 16th century and 17th century, the French people did not change religion, so they continued to be Catholic. And they were good Catholics. And the revolutionaries who needed money and made the churches property of the state, French people didn't like that. But something worse was decided, and that really made the people of France angry, and it was what is called the civil constitution of the clergy. And that was something that the priests didn't like, the people didn't like, and that brought a great deal of antagonism. And the more people opposed, the more the revolutionaries began to apply harsh measures. And that was a vicious circle, because the harsher the revolutionaries were, the more people opposed them, and then they had to start. Imagine that would be the equivalent of any person opposing the revolutionary movement being declared an enemy combatant. Well, it was something similar, because even though those who were taken prisoners did have a trial, it was really a mock trial. It was not a real one, and most people who were accused were condemned. And things got even worse when the King of France, even though monarchy had been already abolished, the King of France was declared the enemy of France and executed. And he was executed by the guillotine. The guillotine is the symbol of the French Revolution, which is interesting because, as you can read here, the reason why it's called the guillotine is because it was invented by a doctor called Dr. Guillotin, is pronounced in French, and it was invented with the idea that people would die faster, therefore they would suffer less, because the way people were executed was either by hanging or by severing the head with an axe. And you know, the axe could miss, and sometimes it took 2 or 3 times for the head to be separated from the body, and that was very, very painful. So the guillotine was supposed to be fast, quick, and humane. And also the guillotine was promoting equality. It didn't matter if you were a member of the nobility or a peasant. If you were considered enemy combatant, then you were executed by the same method. That was the majority of people who were against the government, the new government, were killed by the guillotine. There were other ways, very cruel ways, like drowning in the river or any others, but the guillotine was like the most important. The guillotine also was fast, and so more people could be killed in one day, and that was a very good solution, because so many people were in the prisons that the prisons were just overcrowded. So the guillotine was a way to solve that problem. And remember the gladiatorial games? Well, this was something similar. It gave the people, especially older women who didn't have that much to do to take with them their knitting projects, get to the bleachers early enough and watch Madame the Guillotine working all day. And every time a head was separated from the body, people cheered. And this is what happened during what is called the Reign of Terror. And the person who led the Reign of Terror, Maximilien Robespierre, has some interesting arguments. Something that we have not discussed before is the role of women ever since the scientific revolution. I know you have been reading about it, and I know that you have been taking quizzes about it, but women have been very active, not only in the scientific revolution, but in the Enlightenment. In fact, thanks to the women who organized the salons during the Enlightenment, the ideas of the Enlightenment could succeed and could be spread. But women in the French Revolution had a very strong role. They participated in every event, in the storming of the Bastille, in the March on Versailles, and then we have, I'm sure you are going to enjoy reading it, the Declaration of the Rights of Woman and Female Citizen. And this is what you are reading here is the introduction. Olympe de Gouges was serious in the sense that she claimed that there was a great interest in changing, but that change was not being applied to women, and women were part of society, and so if there were changes for men, the changes should be extended to women. And she applies in her arguments, it's not only the beauty, the woman is superior in beauty, but she appeals to what women go through with the sufferings of giving birth. And so she says, because we are superior in beauty and in the suffering, the courage that we have every time that we give birth, then we expect these rights, and the rights of woman and of female citizen. And then she starts writing. She did not succeed, she was not taken seriously, and she was sent to the guillotine. Another woman who has become famous is Charlotte Corday. I don't think your book mentions Charlotte Corday, and I'm not sure your book mentions Marat. But Marat is one of the famous members of the Committee of Public Safety. He is as famous as Danton or Robespierre. He was a doctor, and he became very active in the revolution. He was a writer, and he published a very important newspaper. And the newspaper was so well written and so popular that many people who opposed the revolution felt that if he disappeared, if he was eliminated, then maybe the revolution would stop. By this time, many people oppose the revolution, not only because if you were a good Christian, you opposed the revolution because of how the revolution was turning anti-Christianity. If you liked the changes, but you felt that they had gone too far, that they were killing too many people, that they shouldn't have killed Louis XVI, that they shouldn't have killed Marie Antoinette, then you would oppose the revolution. So there was a very strong movement of opposition to the revolutions. So Charlotte Corday, who was one of those women who strongly opposed the revolution, came to Marat's house and, pretending to have a list of people who should be condemned to death, she claimed she wanted to give Marat the list. And Marat had a very strange skin disease, and he spent most of his day immersed in a bathtub. And this, what you see here, is the bathtub. So somebody had built for him a special tub where he could be riding while his body was immersed in water. And he was there when Charlotte Corday came to his house and stabbed him to death. This is a very famous painting by Jacques-Louis David. He's a neoclassical artist, French artist, and the story of Charlotte Corday has become famous and associated with the death of Marat and with the painting. This is a very famous painting. Women then are actively participating. They are forming organizations, women organization, etc. However, men still do not take them seriously. This is a quote from an article that I found. I found it online, which analyzes the significance of women, because the famous March on Versailles, which started very early in the revolutionary process, was totally organized by women. And I found interesting that not many people would write this. July 14th, remember, that is the day of independence, and it's the day that the Bastille was taken. July 14 has traditionally been regarded as the date that the French Revolution, as the seizure of power by the bourgeoisie, took place. Another, perhaps better, case can be made out for 6th of October of the same year. And this is the day of the March on Versailles. This was the date when, following a march of women accompanied by members of the National Guard from Paris to the Royal Palace at Versailles to demand bread, the king was forced to recognize the power and legitimacy of the National Assembly by accompanying it back to Paris. The old royal administration then collapsed. The March on Versailles, when the royal family was forced to leave Versailles and go to Paris. Versailles is about maybe 10 miles or 15 miles outside of Paris. And that day is, I believe, more important than July 14th. I am going to ask you to look at Napoleon and look at the main aspects of Napoleon. And I will only mention now the parts that are less known or less considered less popular. The first one that I would like to insist that you take a serious look at is the importance of Napoleon in the development of science. Napoleon was a very special person. He may have had problems, he may have been maybe too ambitious, but he was a very intelligent person, he was very educated, and he really liked intellectual knowledge. He took with him in all his campaigns. He was always accompanied by groups of scientists, and when he went to Egypt, he took with him a great group of intellectuals, and they were lucky in that they found this incredible stone, Rosetta Stone. And because of the writing on the stone, they could decipher the Egyptian hieroglyphs that up until that time had not been deciphered. So this is already 19th century, and people didn't know about Egypt. So a new science developed, the science of Egyptology, and it is thanks to Napoleon. So only that would make Napoleon very, very important in history, just that. But we know Napoleon about his military campaigns. We know that he lost to the British when he tried to invade England in the famous Trafalgar battle. If you go to London, the most important square in London is Trafalgar Square. But analyze how Napoleon won many of his battles, etc. And also, I wanted to show you this picture because Napoleon was quite a character. And even though he agreed with the principles of the Enlightenment, and in his Code Napoleon, that I'm going to ask you to read carefully, he implemented most of the ideas of the Enlightenment. He decided to be crowned emperor and to have his wife Josephine be crowned empress. So he invited the Pope to go from Rome to Notre Dame in Paris, and in the moment when the Pope is about to crown him, Napoleon takes the crown. He just beat the Pope to it, took the crown and placed the crown on his head. He didn't want to make the same mistake that some of you may remember Charlemagne made, allowing the Pope to crown him. Napoleon crowned himself. He did not owe anybody his title of emperor. And then, very carefully, he took the other crown and he crowned his wife, Josephine. That's a very powerful action by Napoleon. And then we have to finish the lesson with a reminder that even though he's considered one of the greatest military leaders, eventually he fell. And after coming back from the invasion of Russia, his troops were devastated and he was defeated and sent to the island of Elba, which is very close to Italy. He escaped, he went back, and he had to, and the people in France welcomed him with open arms. And then there was another battle, the famous Battle of Waterloo, and after that he was sent so far away that he would never be able to escape. He was sent to this, if you saw this island with the right proportion, if you look at the size of Africa and the size of, this is South America, you would not see the island. I had to add a little dot there so you could see it, because it's a tiny little place that belongs to England, and that's where Napoleon spent the last part of his life. And then eventually his body came to Paris, and this is where Napoleon is buried today. If you go to Paris, this is one of the typical places where people go to visit, because it's a beautiful place, and that's where Napoleon is. I hope you don't feel too overwhelmed with this lesson, and I will come back to talk with you when we start the next one.